Good afternoon and welcome to our OBS. Number 30 na po tayo. It's now our 30th broadcast and 30th session of our OBS. Let me remind you, brethren, that past lessons in our OBS is now in YouTube and you can access that. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for posting. And for those who have not subscribed yet, please do so. Let me just make a quick shout out for all of those kind individuals who have been ministry partners. And I don't have to name every one of you, but each time that a new video's been uploaded, you kept on sharing. Daghan kayong salamat sa inyo mga kaigsuunan. Aduunang nga pagyamanak kanyayo kakabsat. At maraming salamat po sa pagiging ministry partner ninyo dito sa ating online Bible study. We are now in the epistles. After we're done with the 4 Gospels and Acts, we are now in the epistles. And this is now the book of Romans. Okay? Not Romance, but Romans. Okay? It has been said that the epistle to the Romans or the letter to the Romans is the most important letter ever written. That was according to Holman and according to some other scholars. And it is Martin Luther's favorite book for the Protestants and for the Reformists. Because from Martin Luther himself, he said he felt like being reborn while reading it, while preparing his lessons out of this book. Okay? So let's talk about the setting of the book of Romans. If you could read Acts chapter 20 verses 2 down to 3, that is the setting. And the truth is, Paul had never been to Rome. But he had been hearing news about the brethren in Rome. He had had association with a couple that frequents Rome, and there had been Christians there in Rome for several years. The history of the church in Rome, how it started and how it began, is unknown. Many believed that the people who were present during the time of the Pentecosts, as evidence in Acts chapter 2 verses 10 down to 11, when they returned home, they brought and they talk about their experience in Judea, in Jerusalem, and that started the church. Others also thought that it was during the persecution. Although Acts chapter 8 would say that the persecution was those who were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria, but others believe also that some of them reached Rome. For that matter, let's just thank God that the church in Rome started without any apostle starting it. So sa mga nagsasabing hindi mauumpisan o walang iglesia kapag walang apostol, ito po ay lantarang pagpapakita at pagpapakilala sa inyo na mayroong iglesia na natatag na walang apostol na nag-umpisa. And this is it. Okay? So let's move on. The date and place of writing, many believe that it was during the spring of 57. Okay? The date was during the spring of 57, and it was on the 3rd missionary journey of Apostle Paul. And it was written probably after Corinthians, or many believe it was written after Corinthians. Probably the 2nd Corinthians, because we know that Corinthians, the first epistle, we'll get there. I'm getting excited and going forward to that. But let's talk about 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians when we get there. Okay? So, the place of writing, many believe could either be, or both, Corinth or Cariaga. For the simple fact that Phoebe, being the letter bearer, the bearer of the letter, the one that brought the letter to Rome, was from Cenchrea. And also Gaius, being mentioned in chapter 16 verse 3, but he was also mentioned in chapter 1 verse 14, believing that Gaius could probably be from Corinth. So the place of writing being Corinth or Cenchrea can be attributed to all of these internal proofs. Or it could also be in Corinth because Erastus also is being mentioned in chapter 16 verse 23, and that is also in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 20. So these things are, but one thing for sure, no doubt they all know who wrote it. No question about who the writer was. It was Paul, the Apostle Paul, or Saul from Saul of Tarsus. Okay, so let's move on. The recipients basically is the congregation or the church of our Lord Jesus Christ at Rome. And as we noticed it, being the capital of the kingdom, the church comprised predominantly of Gentiles, but a major or a substantial majority are also Jews. That is why we have some problems with them. We have some kosher, and we have some laws, ceremonial laws, and things like that. So we'll be dealing with those things when we get there. So chapters 4 verse 1, chapters 9 through 11 will show us who the recipients were. As I have mentioned earlier, the bearer of the letter was Phoebe. And the major theme being is this, and this is where the beauty of the book. It is God's plan of salvation. How is man saved? And others suggested that it is God's righteousness, or the righteousness from God, or God's kind of righteousness. That is the major theme of the epistle, of the book. It revolves around that, the salvation and God's kind of righteousness. Key verses being, a lot would say chapter 3 verses 21 down, but the key verses or the theme, major theme, is this: Romans chapter 1 verses 16 and 17. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, Paul had never been to Rome. So what was the purpose then for writing the epistle to the Romans? One is that to prepare the way for his coming visit. And he stated that in verses 10 to 15 of chapter 1. The second one is to present the basic system of salvation. Basic system. Why basic system of salvation? To a church that had no apostle to start with. To a church that there was no known individual that started it. So he presented the basic system of salvation, and that's why that is the theme of the entire epistle. The next is to explain the relationship between the Jew and the Gentile in God's overall plan of salvation. The Jew, as we have known and as we have studied, will always be proud of four things. He will always be proud of his race. He will always be proud of the law. He will always take pride of the temple. At this time, the temple is not yet destroyed. And he always takes pride of him being circumcised. So, this book explains that. And we ended with Acts chapter 15, the council at Jerusalem, wherein the Jews, though Christians, those of the circumcision group, insisted that the Gentiles must be circumcised and still follow the regulations of Moses, to which Paul And Barnabas debated them, and the elders and the apostles said, let us not put burden on our brethren, because they have. How we became believers, they too. How we were saved, they have the same. Should there be no additions to that matter. Special characteristics of the book is that, one, it is the most systematic of Paul's letters. Probably Paul was thinking, okay, that is the capital of the kingdom, and the learned men are there, so he wrote it like writing an apology. He wrote it like he would like to present the entire gospel systematically, making mention of the condition of man, chapter 1, and that the Gentiles and the Jews are both guilty. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And then he introduced Jesus. He introduced first Abraham. Abraham being the father of the Gentiles and the father also of the Jews. So when we get there, we will get there. This is an interesting book. So his emphasis is on Christian doctrine, the teachings of Jesus. Doctrine being teachings. Okay? The widespread use of Old Testament quotations could show us that indeed the recipients, most of them are familiar with the Old Testament. So, as we have stated earlier, there is a predominant majority also of Jews in this Gentile congregation. Last but not least is Paul could not hide his deep concern for Israel, being a Jew. He could not hide that. And he will be telling that if you're just engrafted, don't boast because you don't support. But the trunk supports you as one of the engrafted or the grafted branches. Deep concern for Israel. We go there from chapter 9. Okay? So let's have a short outline of the book. And this is so easy when we take the short outline of the book. You can almost summarize it with this 6 outline division. The first is the introduction and theme, that is from verses 1 down through 17. 16, 17 being the theme verse or the key verse. The second is the human condition and God's wrath. Okay? God's wrath is being revealed to all mankind, to all. He uses that. So that is from verse 18 down through chapter 3 verse 20. And then the righteousness by faith. Having mentioned that the Jews have sinned, the Gentiles have sinned, both have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Here comes chapter 3 verses 21 down through 4:25, and he had shown us that it is the righteousness by faith. Okay? The next one is chapter 5 down through 8:39, God's righteousness, and he explained it using Old Testament, using events that is familiar for the Jews and probably be not so familiar with the Gentiles, but as we read along, we can understand it also. And then God's faithfulness and purposes for both the Jews and the Gentiles is being explained in verses 1 down to chapter 11 verse 36. Chapter 9, I should say, verse 1 to 11 verse 36. And last but not least is that righteousness in Christian living and service. Interesting. The metamorphosis, the metamorpho, the appeal that chapter 12 verse 1, that we being new in Christ, I appeal to you, brothers I appeal to you, brethren, he says, chapter 12, verse 1, and that is the metamorphosis of a Christian. And chapter 13, subjecting ourselves to proper authorities, up to chapter 14. And many believe that it ends in chapter 14. There are 4 theories on that. It ends in chapter 14. Others don't want to include the personal greetings. Others don't want to include the other greetings in chapter 16. But be that as it may, it is that righteousness in Christian living and service is from chapter 12 verse 1 to chapter 15 verse 13. And the conclusions being in chapter 15 to 14 down through 16 verse 27. So that's the short outline of the book of Romans. Now, let's go over to the theme verse. I will just start it this time, and if you have time, please do read it from different versions. I have presented 3 versions: English Standard Version, the King James Version, and the Good News Bible. The key verses is in Romans chapter 1 verses 16 to 17. And I highlighted some, but I will not be discussing much today as part of the introduction. But if you got time, I want you, brethren, to please look at them. This is very interesting. Oftentimes you could quote Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, to the Jews first and also to the Greeks or to the Gentiles. We oftentimes forget verse 17, but verse 17 is part of that. So let me go on and let's just read for the time being. So it says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. And it is to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greeks. For in it, meaning in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, or from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And that is quotation from the Old Testament. For the King James users, it says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein, meaning inside that gospel, is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the Good News Bible, it says, I have complete confidence in the gospel. It is God's power to save all who believe. First to the Jews and also to the Gentiles. For the gospel reveals, it's not in it, but the gospel reveals how God puts people right with himself. This one way of saying rightness of God. It is through faith from beginning to end. Faith for faith, faith to faith, and then faith from beginning to end. Interesting. How is man considered righteous by God? From beginning to end, from faith to faith, from faith for faith. As the scripture says, the person who is put right with God through faith, the person who is put right with God, how God puts people right with him, people who is put right with God through faith shall live. Interesting. Very interesting version, very interesting rendering from Good News Bible. So, let me just sum it up and then we will end this. And I'm praying that you could read the book of Romans. So, the gospel then is God's power for salvation. What is the gospel? That is the good news. What is the gospel? Others would just say it is the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 1 to 4. But no. The gospel is the good news all about Jesus. What Jesus did. The gospel is the good news. If I tell you something a good news, and will require you a lot of things, that will not be good news to you. If I will be saying, okay, let me present you a good news, but this is what you will do, you will be saying, that's not good news. That's bad news. That's hard news. That is too much for me to take. But if you consider gospel as the euangelion, you meaning good, angelos, then you will consider, what is the good news? What is the gospel? As it is God's power for salvation. And it is first to the Jews, and then second to the Greeks or the Gentiles. It was offered first to the Jews, but they rejected it. So it was offered also to the Gentiles. For us, Gentiles, we are Gentiles by flesh. Okay? The gospel talks about God's righteousness. The gospel reveals God's righteousness. And that kind of righteousness is being revealed through the gospel. So, should I not read just Corinthians? I should be reading the 4 gospels. The gospel. That's why some would show in it, or in the gospel, is the righteousness of God being revealed. Or others who say, therein, in that good news, in that gospel, the righteousness of God is being revealed. What is the righteousness of God? Or God's righteousness? That is God's kind of righteousness. Righteousness being rightness. To be right with God, you should be according to His rightness. That's why when we read, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We fall short of the rightness that God expects from us. And this should be from faith to faith, from faith for faith, from beginning to end. Many of us so excited believing. Many of us so excited accepting the gospel. Many of us so excitedly says, okay, I believe that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. Mind you, the power being used there is dunamis, God's dynamite. But after believing, they shift their righteousness to self. At first, they believe that Jesus is the only way for salvation. After believing that, they shift. And you ask him, how sure are you that you are being saved, or you will be saved? And they will be saying, okay, I don't know if I am good enough, if my works are good enough, if what we do is good enough. And it shifts. But this kind of righteousness, God's righteousness, if when you start by faith, you have to finish it by faith. No shifting. This will be interesting. I'm hoping you will be as interested as I am and as excited as I am. I am excited to go on through this. I know I have given 5 in Acts. We could probably go 6 in here because we will be discussing law, the law. And for those who've been trained that whenever we talk about the law, we always think of the Torah. But in the book of Romans, it is not. The principle is not the same. Anything that you do will be a law to you, or you could impose law to me. So we'll be dealing with this. And brethren, friends. I'd really like for you to read. And just 1:16 and 17, just read it for the time being. And then we'll discuss it next week. Or by Thursday. God willing, by Thursday. I'm not promising anything, but I'm more than willing to do this by Thursday. God permits, and we still have our internet connections. Then I will be presenting it again, OBS 31 by Thursday. I'm so sorry for not coming out on time last week, because I was thinking, really, I recorded it. We pre-recorded it, and then I would have loved to just show the recorded, and we'll be waiting for your input, and I will be answering you so that we could have an interaction. But it took me longer to upload the video than just going live. Pasensya na po. Again, thank you so much for being in this broadcast, and thank you so much for watching. Please share and please subscribe. Please continue to be part of this ministry. May the Lord bless you, and may the Lord keep watch over you, and may His glory shines upon you. God bless.